Hi everyone, a very warm welcome to you all, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Saas Network Ireland summer virtual event. Normally this would be our summer barbecue where we would come together, let our hair down and discuss all things Saas, but sadly due to the impact of COVID-19, this is not possible this year. So here we are embracing the new norm instead. Nevertheless, I think this is going to be a really interesting and insightful interview with lots of tips and knowledge for you all to take away with you. The session will start shortly. I just want to go through a few things with you first. There will be a Q&A at the end, so if you do want to add a question, please just click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and there's also the option to chat with other attendees. So again, just click on the chat button at the bottom and you can take it away from there. For anyone that does have to drop off early, we are recording the session, so please don't worry, we will send that out to everyone later. So now I'm going to pass you over to my colleague Philip, who has a few words to say also.
Thanks, Jill. Appreciate it. So hi, and welcome to everyone in the audience as well. And welcome April, who's joining us from Toronto. Welcome Carl, joining us from Dublin. A couple of words on the Saas network. We are at 140 members in terms of companies at the moment. We've actually decided, due to the great things that are happening in Northern Ireland in tech and in Saas as well, to extend the Saas network to indigenous Northern Irish companies. So if there's anybody joining us today out there, send your application to join the Saas network via info@saasnetwork.ie and we'll look after you. And I guess given the current circumstances and the crazy times that we're in at the moment, please use the network, use the member sheet, contact us if you need anybody to support you and your team. Our next event then, we'll keep you posted, will be in December. Hopefully we'll be able to come together as a group in person. If not, Carl might have some great products that we can run it on. So I'd say, quick question for everybody in the audience again that just joined us. Let us know in the chat who you are, what's your business, and your kind of biggest challenge at the moment. That might give us a good idea who's in the audience and tailor our answers towards that, make it really relevant for you. And then also, if you want to join and follow the Saas network, @SaasNet Ireland is our Twitter handle, info@saasnetwork.ie if you have any questions or follow-up. And follow April, obviously, at April Dunford, or Carl as well, Carl_Mac_Cardi. That's it. So over to you, April and Carl. Could you quickly introduce yourselves and maybe give us a hint on what was the number one thing that you did, or the number one method to get through this COVID, this lockdown?
April, I'll let you go first.
Okay, so I'm April Dunford. I'm based here in Toronto. I spent the first 25-ish years of my career mainly being a repeat vice president of marketing at a series of startups. So I think I did 7 of those. 6 of them were acquired, which resulted in me working at 5 different big companies where I had senior executive roles there. I've launched 16, 17 products into market as an inside exec. And then in the last 3-4 years, I've switched to being a consultant. I very specifically focus on B2B tech companies, and all I do is positioning work. And so we'll get into what positioning is. And last year I launched a book called Obviously Awesome. And so some people know me from that book as well. Oh, and then my biggest, what I've done to get through this situation, eat, like I've been eating a lot. There's a lot of bored eating going on at my house. Yeah, no, it's been bad actually. Oh, and working. That's pretty much all I do right now is work, eat, occasionally sleep. That's it.
That's great. My name is Carl McCarthy. I am the commercial lead here in Tito, event registration software, if you're not familiar. I previously founded Usher, an event discovery platform, and prior to that, for my sins, I was a management consultant, so don't hold that against me. We have been pretty busy in Tito in the last couple of months, obviously, because events has been affected, and we've been spinning up a new product called Vito, which I will love to tell you all about in a few weeks' time when we do a grand unveil. The number one habit during lockdown, I've actually become obsessed with paid communities, and I joined one called Visualize Value, and it was all to do with writing down your macro and micro goals and then having accountability partners, because whilst Tito was and is a remote first company, I was the only person in the company who would go into the office every day. And I found working from home especially difficult to adapt. So I needed someone to kind of just be like, here, what did you work on or whatever, just to kind of like a voice in the room. And it's run by a great guy called, the name escapes me. I will have to think about it, but I'll come back to you. But Visualize Value is the paid community, which I love. So that kind of segues nicely into how I know April. And so I saw April speak at Learn Inbound, which is the marketing conference based in Dublin. And April spoke about positioning, and it literally just spoke to us. It was the major thing was that if you don't have your positioning correct, your sales and marketing processes and activities are completely kind of handicapped. You can't be efficient at all in those processes. So I was like, right, we need to get our positioning sorted. And then obviously, as April said, she wrote a book, which we read, and I've read 3 or 4 times, and can't recommend it enough. But rather than kind of me mangle what positioning is, April, I'd love for you to explain what positioning is and why people sometimes get it mixed up with branding and messaging and things like that.
Right. Yeah, that's a good starting point, because it is a very misunderstood concept, which is weird because positioning is not a new concept. It's been around since the early 80s. Actually, if you go to marketing school and you learn about positioning, the book they'll give you is this book called Positioning: The Battle for Your Mind by these guys, Rees and Trout. And it was written in 1982. This is like before the internet. This is my gag. Do I have it here? Oh yeah, I do. This is my gag that I do. If you buy that book now, if you go to university, buy that book now, it looks like this. But the original copy of this book, this is how old it is. Check this out.
Nice.
Anyways, so it's an old concept, but even if I got a room full of marketing experts together and asked them define positioning, you're likely to get a dozen different definitions. So some people will think it's the same thing as messaging, or the same thing as a tagline, or your vision. Or my personal pet peeve is when people talk about brand positioning, and I'm like, there's positioning and there's branding, but those two things are actually separate. And in fact, positioning has to come first. So it is kind of the underpinning of almost everything we do in marketing and sales. So my definition of it is this. So positioning defines how your product is the best in the world at providing some kind of value that a well-defined set of customers cares a lot about. Now that's a really big definition, but that's because that encompasses, it's really saying, how do you define who is my competitor or the alternative solutions to doing what I do? How am I different from that? What is the differentiated value I can deliver for customers with my product? And oh yeah, what customers are we talking about? So what is the tight definition of exactly who is an ideal customer for my product? And then the last bit is this concept of market category, which is kind of like, what market is it that you intend to compete in and win? So you need all of that stuff before you do any of the other things. Like, I can't build you messaging if I don't know exactly who are the target customers and how are we different and better than which competition. I need to know that stuff first. The mistake we often make in startups is we kind of have a vague idea of all that stuff. It's not like we can't answer those questions. It's that we've never sat down and deliberately determined exactly what that looks like for our business, specifically where it's at right now.
Interesting. One of the first steps in your framework was identifying who your ICP is. And with kind of the current markets contracting in certain sectors, do you feel like the ICP would have changed in the last 6 months?
Yeah, well, in some cases it has, and in some cases it hasn't. The big thing that's changed in the last 6 months is some buyers, like if you're selling to businesses, some businesses have really had a change in priority.
Yeah.
In terms of what's super important to their business right now. So if you think about, I'm a software vendor and I sell to businesses, my value that I can provide to businesses, it kind of splits out into two big categories. The value I provide is either I'm doing something specific that's going to help your business make money, or I'm doing something specific that's going to help your business save money. Now, when the economy is really good and everything's going good, and we're kind of in expansion mode, this makes money value proposition is usually way stronger than, we're going to save you a couple of bucks. But then you have like something like this happens, and there's, certain parts of the economy are completely closed, and there's some businesses that literally can't make money right now. You coming into them with a value proposition of, hey, my thing's going to help you expand and do more sales and whatever, might feel a little irrelevant for a company that said, you know what, we're not in expansion mode right now. We're in survival mode. We're just trying to conserve cash and live long enough that we can see the end of this thing. And so you might have to adjust your positioning to align more around this priority of savings versus expansion. Now, some of the companies that I've worked with, and you probably have this a lot with the people in the audience here, what they've got is when they go out and talk to their customers, some of them business is booming. Some of them business is closed and terrible. And some of them are sort of in the middle. So a little bit of good, little bit of bad. So what these companies are doing is they're trying to figure out, for the most part, they're trying to orient themselves, at least in the short term, to focusing on the piece of their target market that is still going good and there's opportunity to still sell stuff. So that's another change that's happened in this whole COVID.
So would you feel that the need for, so say if I was about to commence a positioning project in January, and then, shit hits the fan and I'm unsure, do you feel that if my business has been affected, ignoring those that are booming, would you feel that a positioning project would be elevated in terms of priority or kind of put to the bottom of the list?
Yeah, and unfortunately, it kind of depends. So I've been super busy over the since March. And most of the companies that I'm working with are companies that are essentially doing an adjustment on their positioning in response to what's happened in their market as a result of COVID. So for those companies, they see it as a super high priority because there's been a fundamental shift in their market, but it really depends on your market.
Yeah.
Like what you want to do in situations like this is take the temperature of your customer base and try to figure out, have their priorities shifted? If they have, how? And do I still align with that stuff or not? If you don't, then the next question to ask yourself is this a short-term thing or a long-term thing? So some of the companies I'm working with, their customers are doing things differently, but their customers are doing short-term things differently, but their long-term plans for where they're going to spend money and their long-term hiring plans haven't shifted. That being the case, then if you're a vendor to them, I think you've got to take the cue from them and you'll say, maybe you're running some short-term campaign things, but you may not have to fundamentally shift your positioning just yet because your customers are seeing this as a short-term thing. I have other companies that I'm working with, particularly the ones that sell to banks insurance companies, where those folks are making long-term decisions about where they're reallocating resources, what they're making long-term decisions about budget that's going to basically impact the way they spend on software for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
So that being the case, yeah, maybe you need to do a check-in with your customers. Make sure your stuff still works the way it did pre-COVID. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to take a step back and take another look at that positioning.
Sure. And as you say in your book, that positioning isn't written in stone. So, that's another something that kind of stuck with me as well. You can certainly have a 6 month or 12-month plan to kind of get yourself out of that hole. Is there any recent examples of companies that have managed to dig themselves out of a hole with positioning?
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm trying to think if there's
anybody
I'm allowed to talk about. So I have seen a handful of companies do a really good job of balancing between this make money, save money, or expansion versus safety kind of thing. So, for example, I'm not allowed to say their name, so I'm gonna talk about them in vague terms, but they're kind of like a new bank is what they are. Like in the United States, they're sort of a new style bank. And what they sell is like a high yield savings account. But how they do that is they essentially have a market for treasury bills. So what happens is you put your money into the savings account, but what they actually do is they buy you treasury bills. So there's two results of this. One, they can produce a savings account that gives you higher return than a regular savings account, which gives you zero. And the second thing is it's a really safe place to put your money, because even if the bank goes out of business, you still own treasury bills. But pre-COVID, they were very much oriented around this. We're going to help you make money. So, you put your money in here where you're going to get better return and more interest on that money. And that's why you want to go with us. Mm. And COVID hits and a couple of things happen. One, the markets go nuts, right? They're all down and then they're up and then who knows what they're going to do. And so is the return actually going to be better on this compared to other things? It's not quite as clear cut as it was pre-COVID, although you're pretty much guaranteed it's going to be better in a savings account, which is literally zero, in some cases negative right now. But the flip side of it is this: I got a place to park my money where I'm not going to lose anything. It looks really appealing all of a sudden. So they always talked about both things, but they led with the high yield thing, and the secondary thing was, oh yeah, by the way, you can't lose any money on this thing. And they just kind of switched it. So, for them now, they're leading with that. Their target market's a little bit different, because before they were kind of targeting folks that, were looking for a place to park their money, but that makes some cash. The demographics a little bit have shifted in terms of who wants to do that. It's folks that are really worried about safety. It's folks that might need the cash in the short term and can't ride out the volatility, things like that. So they're one example of one that's shifted. Yeah.
Interesting. And so, the general learning is that if there is a recession coming around the corner, who knows? But if there was, to increase marketing spend rather than contract. And
who said that?
Who said that?
Who said that?
The general learning, I think it is to increase.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. I'm saying it. So yeah, but what I want to know is, so like kind of with the go-to-market strategies, is there any examples of people executing go-to-market strategies badly in conjunction with positioning?
Well, there's positioning and go-to-market strategy are two different things, right? So you can have great positioning and then you die in the execution of it out in the market. And that happens in lots of different ways. The most common way it dies in the execution out in the market is straight inconsistency. So not everybody on the team is aligned around that positioning. And so the positioning then doesn't get communicated in a consistent way. So it doesn't stick in the market because everybody's like, you're what again? And are you this? Are you that? The other thing is that, here's the thing that I think about, like, if I were to give you some advice, like if you knew the market was about to change or something bad was about to happen, what would you do in preparation for that? This is my advice. So the only way you know how to react to a big shift in the market is by getting really close to your customers and figuring out what's going on with my customers. Because the answer is always like, it depends. It depends on what's going on with your customer base, and your customer base is different than everybody else's customer base. This COVID situation is a great example of that, in that some companies are going gangbusters. Some companies are doing terrible. Some companies are just a weird mix of both. You don't know unless you're out there talking to your customers. So the minute things blow up and there's big changes, what you need is a really big open line of communication to a group of customers that you would consider a really good fit, so you can tap into them and find out, well, what's going on. Most companies don't have that, particularly startups. Like, they might have some programs going on where they run a net promoter score once in a while, or they do a SAT survey, or they do whatever. But in situations like this, like, you can't survey your way out of this one. Like, you're going to have some deep conversations with customers because you're not even smart enough to know what questions to ask. And so I'm a big fan of having a customer advisory board, which is a thing that big companies all have, but a lot of startups don't. But there's lots of ways to run a customer advisory board where they're sort of cheap and not a lot of overhead to run one. The cool thing about having a customer advisory board is you have a group of customers that you've identified as being good fit for your business, and you have basically got an arrangement with them where they have agreed to be your advisor, which means they have committed to picking up the phone when you call them because crap is hitting the fan. And so the companies that I know that I've been working with that had customer advisory boards, I felt like they were able to shift really quickly because they called advisory board, meaning they tapped into their advisors on the customer side. And even though the customers were super busy and their hair was on fire too, those customers responded, they got feedback really fast, and then they were able to adapt. The companies that were a bit slower, they're calling me saying, how do I get a customer to pick up the phone? Because their business is in trouble too, and nobody wants to talk to me right now. And it's like, you need to plant the seeds and lay the groundwork for that big open pipe of communication before you actually need it.
That's interesting you say that. That's actually one of the first things we did in March, was set up a customer advisory board, because obviously T-show revenue bombed by 95% in the space of a few weeks. And
so how did you tap into your customer advisory board when this stuff happened?
Well, we've just done the positioning project quite recently. So we already knew who our ICP was, and we conducted a huge number of customer interviews. So at least 100. So wow. We had identified who we wanted to speak with, but now it was a balancing act that these customers, their actual businesses were imploding at the same time as ours. So we had to be a little bit, tread lightly, but with regards asking for time. But we managed to group them all together, and we used Basecamp, so it was asynchronous. And they got a huge amount out of it, right. Talking to one another. So the ask wasn't help us stay afloat. It was speak to one another, and we'll try and glean a few kind of gems out of it, and that worked quite well for us in terms of shaping the new product.
Now, I think that's actually an important point, right? Like, so I have a handful of other folks that I'm working with right now that, they're like, we're trying to, it's probably a really bad time to form a customer advisory board. And I'm like, actually, it might be a great time to form a customer advisory board, because your customers are in so much flux. They actually want to talk to each other. Like, as long as they're not directly competitive, or, you know, it depends on the market, but there's value in them. And one of the things you could provide as value to your customers right now is community and ways for them to talk to each other to figure out how's everybody else responding to this thing and what's working and what isn't working out there in the market right now.
Yeah, community has emerged as a key trend in the last few months, and you mentioned trends in the book as a kind of like the pro move to add onto your positioning. Can you explain a little bit more on what that means?
About trends?
Yeah, trends. Yeah, we didn't apply it in our positioning because we just felt like that was expert mode.
It is expert mode. That's what I think. So in my book, I'm talking a bit about how would you figure out, you know, who's the real competitor to what you do, and then how are you different, and what's the value for customers, and which customers care the most about that value, and therefore we're going to win in this market. Now, sometimes I'll have people come and they'll say, we got that, April. We got all that. We know exactly who we're after, and we do a good job of positioning in the market and stuff. The problem is that the market's just kind of boring. Like, it's not, you know, we have a really hard time getting the press to cover us because it's not sexy. It's not now, you know, and so trends are a way that you can, you know, so great positioning answers the question, what is this thing? Why should I care? And you do a good job of that, then I think you've got a good underpinning for great marketing and sales. But sometimes you get these markets that are kind of boring and they're not so, and the problem is the customers don't feel the urgency to buy right now. So they're like, yeah, I get it. I get what you do. This year I'm really focused on this. This isn't a priority right now, or maybe we'll put it off till next year. And so trends are one way you can kind of move that up the priority list, and it helps answer the question, why is this important to me right now? So trends are funny because we do a bad job about trends in tech in particular. Like, we often confuse markets and trends. Like, when I say market, I mean like a group of solutions that we could categorize together. So like CRM is a market, and there's different players in there. Pipedrive's a CRM, Salesforce is a CRM, you know, there's all kinds of CRMs. HubSpot has a CRM. Those are markets. So CRM, networking gear, email, these are markets. But then there's trends. The trends are different. The trends are like things that could apply to any market. So like right now, machine learning is a big trend. AI is a big trend. Now I could take AI and apply it to email, or AI and apply it to CRM, or any other market there is out there. So sometimes you'll get customers that are like, you know what? This year is the year of the customer, and we're really focused on customer experience this year, and all the money we spend is going to be around customer experience because customer experience is a thing right now. Or it's digital transformation, or it's leveraging AI, or it's whatever.
Or you can invent your own.
Well, it's a little harder, right? Like, generally these are things that the customer's already got a priority, right? And so then you show up and you say, hey, I want to sell you this, you know, event management software. And they're like, go away unless it has something to do with one of my key strategic priorities over here. And so if you can align with that, then you can help answer the question, like, why is this important now? So I'll give you a great example. And they fit into this COVID one as well, actually.
Perfect.
So I sit on the board of a company called Sampler. And what Sampler does is, you know what product sampling is? Like, if you go into the grocery store, sometimes you'll see these people on the street corner, and like consumer packaged goods brands has just launched a new granola bar or something, and they're handing out samples on the street corner, and it's like gum or energy drinks or something like that, and they're giving out free samples. This is a billions and billions of dollars a year business right now, and consumer packaged goods brands spend a fortune having somebody stand in the grocery store giving out free samples, or standing on the street corner giving out free samples. it's a terrible way to do it. It's a good way to get some samples into people's hands, but there's lots of problems with it. You don't know who took the sample. You can't really measure whether it had any impact on sales. You can, you have some vague measurements of, in this area where we did a lot of sampling, we saw the sales go up, but you don't really know anything about those people and what they did. Sampler kind of digitizes this, right? So what they have is a giant and rapidly expanding database of people that are interested in getting a sample of stuff. And in order to get a sample of stuff, they answer a couple of questions. So we know a bit about them, like, do they have kids or not? Or do they have a dog or not? Or are they into healthy food or not? Some things like that help us qualify. And then they match you with a sample, put it together, or a bunch of samples, put it in a box, and they send it to your house. Sometimes it comes with a coupon, but the company can follow up with an email and say, how did you like it? Where did you go? Did you buy any of the stuff? What happened after the sample? And figure this out. So digital product sampling is what they do, right? That's their market category. So now COVID hits. and this is an accelerant on their business. All of a sudden, I can't stand on the street corner and hand out samples anymore. It's literally against the rules. I'm not allowed to put people inside the grocery store handing out. So like all of that is just dead. And it's like gone overnight. And the brands all responded by the trend and the way the brands described the trend overall of us not being able to do things, with customers was, the at-home experience. So we had the at-home experience of grocery shopping and the at-home experience of, home delivery of whatever. So what Sampler did was they really tilted hard into that trend. And so, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to use Sampler. Like one of it is that, you can gather all this customer information, and there are other trends that they could have leaned into. But instead, right now, they're leaning into this one of like, it's at-home product sampling. That's what it is. And that layering that at-home bit on just got everybody to sort of click on, yeah, shit, we can't really do sampling any other way right now. And so their business is on a tear. They,
Interesting.
Things are going really good for them. And that's really helping. It's really helping them align with this, the other brands are all hair on fire. What are we going to do about this at-home experience thing? It's like, I got the perfect solution for that.
Yeah, well, that's the perfect thing, as you say, alignment of the sales and marketing teams, that there's a clear direction to kind of dig yourself out of that hole. So that's a perfect example. Right. Moving up the channel, you speak a lot about enterprise, and it's one of your favorite areas for positioning. Could you explain a little bit more about that?
My background's all enterprise software, and most of that is like, big ticket, what we would call a very complex enterprise software. So what I like about enterprise software is I like that we have salespeople involved. So where we have salespeople involved, then we tend to get a lot of information about what's going on that I can use in my positioning. So one of the first things we need to really understand in positioning is who exactly is our competitor. Now, for most companies get this wrong, surprisingly. So most companies that I work with, I'll say, who's your competitor? And they'll list a whole bunch of companies that are really small, but, nobody's ever heard of them, but they're kind of in your space, so they'll say, oh, there's these. But then if I say, well, do you actually lose a deal to those people? Do you actually even see them in a deal? And a lot of the times the answer I get is, well, no, but we might. So they're not actually your competitor. And when I say, but what is the customer doing like before you showed up? Like if you didn't exist, what would the customer be doing right now? And the answer is often, for B2B software, the answer is often, they'd be using a spreadsheet. Or, they'd hire an intern and we just do manual process stuff. So, this concept of who exactly is your competitor, if I have salespeople, they know this. So if I can go to my salespeople, and if I'm doing really fancy, I've got it all recorded in my CRM. But even if I don't, I can go to my salespeople and say, what's everyone doing before they're using you? So they had the problem before you showed up. How were they solving the problem before? So what are we actually displacing in the account? That's the first thing. And then what you often have is the company suffers along with spreadsheets and documents and manual processes. And then at some point they're like, I got to do something different. So I need to understand, what is that moment? Because I need to get them at that moment. Because the next thing that happens is they make a short list of potential solutions. And so if they make a short list of potential solutions, I want to know who those other solutions are, because I got to beat them too. And so again, if I have sales reps, your sales reps know this, because the competitors will tell them. Or the customers will tell you who the competitors are. They'll say, well, hey, we looked at, you have a CRM, but we looked at Salesforce and they do these 5 things. Can you do that 5 things? They know who they're competing against. So I kind of like enterprise software that way. I also like enterprise software because, we make a lot of money there, unlike consumer, where everybody is going broke.
It's funny you say, like, the sales reps have a huge wealth of information, and sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between that and like the management team. And I'm just kind of looking at some of the questions here on the chat. Figuring out who your ICP is, what do you recommend is the best approach for that? Yeah,
so I have real opinions about this. So here's what I believe. When we build the product originally, like, we're all startups, right? So when we build the product originally, we start with what I would call a positioning thesis. So if we're doing this right, we went out, we did a bunch of customer discovery conversations and calls, and we came up with a thesis. And the thesis says, here's our competitor, here's how we're different, this is the value we can deliver for customers, and here's my ICP. These are the people that are going to care about this value. So I have this thesis. But then I go out and I launch the thing in the market, and maybe it's just me, but in my experience, the thesis is always wrong. Sometimes it's really wrong, sometimes it's just a little wrong. But you learn things after you've been in the market for a while. So, at the beginning, it's okay if your positioning is kind of loose and you don't exactly know what your ICP is exactly. You just want to get it into a bunch of people's hands. You want to get them using it, and you need to get this base level experience. But once you've been going for a while and your product is selling, you should be able to start seeing some patterns amongst the folks that love you as to why do they love you so much. And that's where you really want to go look. Like, one thing that I find startups do it, actually big companies do it too, but startups will get all bent out of shape about the deals that they lost. And I don't think there's much to learn in lost deals in an early stage startup, because, like, let's face it, there's 1,000 reasons not to pick you, like literally 1,000. Like, you're too small, you're too risky, you're too weird, I don't get it, your sales rep is a jerk, my buddy works at the competitor. There's 1,000 reasons not to pick you, literally 1,000 reasons. You should treat every happy customer like a miraculous snowflake. You're like, oh my gosh, you picked us. What the? And then you should be asking yourself, why? Like, what is it about you? I didn't sell all these other people, but I sold you and you're super happy. What is it about you? And that's what you're trying to figure out. So in my process of positioning, the starting point is this idea of competitive alternatives. Like, if they didn't use you, what would they use? This is actually a really important concept to understand. I don't care who my competitive alternative is for all the people that didn't pick me. I literally don't care. And you know what? I don't care what the competitive alternative is for the people that even did pick me, but they're not all that happy, and so they're likely to churn later. I really, really, really care about the ones that are a good fit for me meaning they intuitively understood what I do. They closed really fast. They didn't ask for a discount. Once they got the stuff, they were super happy. They recommended to their friends. Everything's good. For those people, who did I have to compete with to win that deal? That's what I want to know. If I didn't exist, what would those people be doing? That's my starting point. If I can figure that out, then I can say, all right, I know what I'm competing against for those kind of customers. Then I can say, here's what I've got that those competitors don't. So maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's other software, but I can write it. I can actually list a set of features and say, I have all this capability that these competitors don't. And then I can take those capabilities, I can map it to value, which is the so what. You have that feature. So what? Why does a customer care? Once I have that value, then I can really get under who my ICP is. Because then I'm basically asking myself, what are the characteristics of a company that makes them particularly suited to my value? That's the trick. So I'll give you an example. I work with this company. They do what they originally called online calendaring software. So that was bad positioning because everybody thought they were like Calendly or something, but they don't. They actually do this for big companies. And so if you look at the competitive alternative for them wasn't Calendly. The competitive alternative was this big company writing this stuff themselves. It's custom code. And so all the features that the customers really like about them is like, if you are booking an online appointment with someone and you have multiple brands and multiple locations and multiple agents with multiple areas of specialization, it will match you. So let's say you want to get your taxes done. You go on here, you fill out a questionnaire, and then it books a meeting with you with a tax prep specialist who knows the products you're interested in and understands companies like you or whatever, and it matches you with that and is close to your house. And so it matches you with that, and then it does all this stuff to make sure you actually show up to the appointment, like send you a map and all this stuff, send you a SMS reminder. So there's my value, and then you say, well, who cares a lot about that? Well, if I don't have multiple locations and reps with multiple areas of specialization, I can still solve their problem and we'll still sell some stuff to them. But if you've got all that stuff, literally no one else can do that. So they're a super fit for that software. And then you say, well, who has that? Who has multiple locations and multiple products, multiple areas of specialization? And you start going down the list and it's like financial services has that. Tax preparation, mortgage sales. In the US, they have credit unions. Credit unions sell you all this stuff. Some cases where they're selling to small businesses, like telcos, have things like this. And so that helps to actually narrow down, well, this is my ICP and here's why.
Yeah.
Most people, when they talk about ICP, they just don't have enough detail on it. They'll say, we sell to small businesses. Well, there's billions and billions of small businesses. I can't make a campaign to go sell small businesses. It's too big. So, but I can make a campaign to go sell to credit unions. That's pretty easy. I can make a list of them. I can go get them. And all my marketing and sales efforts are going to be really efficient because I've narrowed right in on this group of customers that really needs the thing that I've got, rather than just trying to blast the world of enterprises that might need appointment setting.
That's an interesting point, because when we did our positioning exercise, I had this preconceived idea that Eventbrite was not a direct competitor, it was an indirect competitor. And so when we started digging into what the characteristics of our ICP were, and one of them was kind of just one-man band running their own event, B2B events. That was it. But they were mostly coming from Eventbrite. And we were like, but Eventbrite's positioning is music. So we were like, wow, this is a big opportunity really to target those. And I think it was like 30% of their revenue was coming from business. So it was like, yeah, we'll just take that. Thanks very much. And that's kind of another thing I wanted to ask you about is, do you think that it makes much sense to keep an eye on your competitors' positioning and if it changes and then taking advantage of that?
Yeah, well, I do think that, so there's two things. So one, your competitors, so let's say you do this thing and you look at the competitive alternatives for your good fit customers, right? Who's the competitive alternatives? And you see that there's a couple of folks on there that you absolutely see them in deals. You got to beat them out in deals. You can absolutely use the competitor's positioning against them. Right. And that is almost always true. So inside, even if that competitor is gigantic, you can use it against them. So I'll give you an example. When I was at IBM, like one of our big value propositions was, you want to use IBM because our stuff is trusted. And look at other, it's look at all the customers that use our stuff, and it's really stable, and it all just works, and it all works with all the other IBM stuff, and it's you want to use it because everybody else is using it. That's why you want to use it, and all that. Whereas little startups selling against us would come in and say, you know what sucks about IBM? There's no innovation there. Why? Because they got too many people using it. They can't be changing all the stuff all the time.
I use that all the time. Yeah, David Goliath one works it all the time.
Well, and same thing with, like, you'll have a big competitor that's like that in a feature function checklist tick list war is going to beat you all the time because they have all this functionality that you don't have. But you know what comes with that? Complexity. Yeah. You lose all your ease of use. Yeah. So you'll have a competitor that's there, like the most feature complete, whatever, and you'll be like, yeah, sure, if you want 99 things on the drop-down list, man, but you know what you need? You need simplicity. You need ease of use.
I would say the jack of all trades, master of none. And
that's it. We used to talk about that at IBM. Like, when you're selling platforms, like, that's what you talk about, is you say, look, you want an end-to-end solution where everything works together and it's seamless and the data passes through, and here's all the value of having all the data passing through and blah, 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 blah. But if you're a point solution, you go in and say, yeah, okay, maybe you want to buy the database from IBM, but look at that piece of junk they've got in there. Like, yeah, they got an end-to-end solution, but it's one good thing and 19 things that are crap. Yeah. You know what you need? Best of breed. And our stuff will integrate in with that, and it'll be just like the end-to-end thing, except you'll actually get a good thing.
And like the best of breed or best in class argument, I feel is gaining traction in the market, especially with APIs becoming stronger and stronger, that you can just build your own stack and you can take on the big boys.
I think there's always going to be, again, this is where who you're focused on matters, right? Because some companies want all-in-one, and there's reasons why they got to have all-in-one. Like, if you look at IBM, IBM's a great example. IBM literally sells to 90 accounts. 90. Mm. And they're giant, every single one. It's like the Fortune 500. It's the Fortune 100, more or less, right? So if I'm a giant insurance company, no way am I doing best of breed. Forget that. I don't have the time. I don't want to negotiate contracts with all those people. I don't want the integration heft that goes with that. I want one throat to choke. Thank you very much, right? But if I'm outside of that, then it's different, right? Then it's like, no, actually, I want some leverage. I don't want IBM to know that I'm in their pocket and they can soak me for everything because they think I got to buy everything from them. I don't want that. I actually care about the cash that flows around here. And I want to have 3-4 different vendors, and I want to bid them off against each other. And I don't want one throat to choke because that costs me money and I don't have. So there's all kinds of reasons why you would do one versus the other. And again, if you understand in your target market, if you can identify a target market that really, really wants the value you can deliver, then that's what you do. You just run straight at them and let IBM have the other ones that care about this. There's only 90 of them. Go get everything else.
Yeah, completely. Coming up to your favorite topic, product market fit.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so just for some Just for some context for those who joined late, when I met April at Saas, feels like many, many years ago, but it was only months. April went on a rant about product market fit and why people should just shut up about it, which kind of piqued my interest. And then I saw another tweet, and it was unpopular opinion. Product market fit isn't a thing. I'm not even sure it's a useful concept for startups. Explain yourself.
That is my position. My position is that product market fit is not a thing. It's just not a thing. Like, okay. So here's my opinion on this. So product market fit, by the way, as a concept, was invented by venture capitalists.
Yeah.
And what it represents is there's this magical moment where you know that your product is a good fit for a market, and it's the moment at which you are confident that you can put your foot on the gas with marketing and sales, and everything's going to go like this in terms of sales, right? For a venture capitalist, it represents the perfect moment to write a check. That's what I want to get you. You haven't gone up here yet, but you're just about to go. That's what it's the magic moment. Now, can we know when we have this magic moment? We don't. We absolutely don't. Go ahead and Google this all day if you want. No one knows how to measure product market fit. So the measurements I've seen are laughably bad. So people will say things like, you know, you have product market fit if I go around and I do this survey and I ask people, how disappointed would you be if this thing went away? And if more than a certain percentage of people would be extremely disappointed, then you know you have product market fit.
That's superhuman, Rahul. And it was the 40%, was it, the threshold?
Well, he actually took it from Sean Ellis, who was using it for years before.
Okay.
And again, it's a very B2C kind of thing. Let's say I sell to businesses and I'm trying to use that. So I have 10 customers, 10 accounts, and I went and asked them, and more than X number of people of those accounts said they'd be really super disappointed if the thing went away. So let's say 7 out of 10 said they'd be really disappointed if it went away. Great, I got product market fit. Now what do?
Yeah.
I'm supposed to go put my foot on the gas for marketing and sales. But wait a second, how do I do that? What is the market that I have a fit for? Do I really know who my ICP is? What if those 10 accounts are all different? One's in banking, one's in insurance, one's a retail thing, one's a gas station. They're all happy. How do I expand?
Yeah.
Nobody knows, right? So we talk about product market fit, but we have no concept of market in that. And the market means I know how to go put my foot on the gas, and I literally don't.
Yeah.
So no one knows how to measure it. So I don't know when I have it. Here's the other thing. Everyone will agree that you can lose it. You can lose product market fit because your product changes, the market changes, things change. So you can lose it. How do I know when I've lost it? Oh, nobody knows how to measure that either. So I have this concept that is impossible to measure, so how do I plot a course to get there? If I don't know how to measure it, how am I actually driving towards product market fit?
Okay.
So let me propose an alternative.
I was just about to ask, what is the alternative?
Because there is one. And that's why product market fit drives me crazy. There is one. So if what we're trying to do is find the moment where we can put our foot on the gas in marketing and sales, why don't you ask the vice president of marketing instead of a venture capitalist when that moment happens? Because I know, because I'm in charge of doing that. So here's how I know. I know we're ready to go put the foot on the gas for marketing and sales is when I can build a marketing campaign. I know how to build a marketing campaign if you can succinctly tell me exactly who it is that I need to go after. It helps if I got a good value proposition to deliver those people. But if you can tell me, these are the people exactly, then I can build you a marketing campaign to go around it. So let me give you an example. I get brought in as the vice president of marketing for this company. They're like 20 million revenue. You think they have product market fit, right? So I say to the CEO, he says, okay, put our foot on the gas. Let's grow this thing. And I say, okay, who are we selling to? And he says, Fortune 500 companies. I can't run campaigns. I couldn't even begin to tell you what would I run a campaign for that hits Fortune 500 companies. Take out an ad in the Wall Street Journal. I can't run a campaign for that. So I'm like, well, that's not enough, dude. And I'm like, I don't even think that's true. I'm like, what they had was this software for people that manage internal software development projects. And I'm like, okay, and the people that use it are business analysts. I'm like, okay, so what if, do all Fortune 500 companies have business analysts that do this sort of stuff? Like, what if I'm a mining company? Do I do that? And he's like, no, you don't. And I'm like, okay, so it's Fortune 500 minus the mining companies. All right, so, but wait a minute, I work at in tech, and I never heard of what you do. So do you sell to tech companies? Like, no, not tech either. And I'm like, what the? Okay, so we take those out. I'm like, wait, what if I was Fortune 5,000 and I have a lot of business analysts and we do a lot of that thing that you solved the problem for? Would I be in your target market then? And he says, well, yeah, probably. And I'm like, okay, so you've defined your target market by one thing, company size, and we've just proven that that has nothing to do with whether or not you're a fit. So how do I know how to run campaigns? Here's how we do it. We do a net promoter score survey on everybody they've got. Who's happy, who's not. Then I take all the happy people and I do 30 one-on-one customer interviews with them. And I say, hey, how are you solving the problem before? And what happened that made you think you had to solve it in a different way? And then when you did decide, why did you pick us? And who were we looking at? And you know what I found out? Everybody that was really happy with our software, they said, well, we were using something else. And then what happened was we decided to, we ended up with a distributed development team. And the old project management stuff we were using didn't work for that, but you guys do this great job of managing distributed development teams. And I'm like, how come you had a distributed development team? And they're like, oh, we did an acquisition. Or they'd say, because we outsourced it to India and China.
Gotcha.
Insight. Yeah. Now, if you come to me and you say, look, April, I want to sell to businesses that have this business analyst function, and I can find that on LinkedIn, and they need to be over a certain size because our shit's expensive and not everybody can afford it. So you need to be bigger than a certain size, and you outsource development to India and China. Can I run a campaign on that? Oh, I could do that all day, man. So, like, do you know that there used to be, this was going back a few years, there used to be a magazine called Outsourcers Weekly, and you could buy a full page ad in Outsourcers Weekly for $5,000. And I drove $1 million worth of pipeline running ads in this cheesy Outsourcers Weekly thing.
Brilliant.
We went to these really specialized trade shows. We targeted like lawyers that only did M&A stuff because all we cared about was companies that were doing a lot of M&A that had dev teams. So what I want is not product market fit, because that's like saying I want a pony, right? But what I want is an actionable customer segmentation. You give me an actionable customer segmentation, any good vice president of marketing is going to go, now we're going to make some money. Yeah. But if you come to me and say, build me some campaigns for this like Fortune 500 companies, we're not ready just to put our foot on the gas because we don't know how. So anyway, so that's my rant. Product market fit, it's not a thing. Like, you should see people twist themselves into pretzels to try to explain to me how I just don't understand it, April, because if you just understood it, you'd know it's a thing. And I'm like, look, if it's that hard to understand, it is not operationally useful to me at a startup. Mm-hmm. Whereas I can explain to anybody what an actionable customer segmentation is. And if you understand it, then you know the steps to take to go and get it. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, and as you said at the very start, if it's, it's coming from VCs, not from the startup community. So
it's like the VCs are like, they made it up, and I see why they made it up, because it's an awesome concept, right? And I can see why they want it to exist, because if they could figure out how to measure it, then they could figure out when to write you a check. but they don't know. And that's why no VCs ever actually make money.
You're like one of the comments here says, please, can I play this recording at my next board meeting?
This is the worst part, is that there's all these startups out there are now forced to try and prove to their board that they have this thing that isn't even a thing.
Yeah.
That no one can tell them how to prove that it's there or not there, because it literally doesn't exist. But there are these guys sitting on the other side going, there's a thing and it's a thing and I need to know whether or not you have it. Otherwise I'm not writing you a check. It's the most, like, it's terrible. It's a catch-22. So now all the CEOs and founders and people, executive teams at these companies are forced to pretend that it exists. And not only pretend that it exists, they also need to pretend that they have it.
I feel like we could talk about...
Guys with the checks are saying you got to have it, otherwise I'm not going to write you one. But it's goofy. It's stupid.
We could talk about this a lot further, but I don't want to monopolize too much of your time. I'm going to start picking out some questions from the audience. From Brendan of Learn Upon. Hi, Brendan. I'd be interested to hear April's take on whether onboarding and customer success should be assigned or start to work with the customer immediately after the deal closes, or should just be the OBS initially and they hand over to the CMS post-launch?
Who's the OBS? What's OBS stand for? What's OBS?
Yeah, that's a good question. Brendan.
Onboarding something?
Specialist? Yeah, could be.
Probably depends. Like, it probably depends on your actual onboarding process and your software itself and all this stuff. I've seen a lot of companies do really well to have customer success and whoever's going to be responsible for onboarding involved earlier rather than later. Like, in some cases involved before the deal is even closed, just to give the customer a good feeling that we're going to take care of you, we're going to handle this, we're going to go whatever. You're starting to build that relationship. Makes it easier to close the deal, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, otherwise the handover... Sorry, go for it. I was just about to say the handover can be quite jarring then otherwise, if you're just like, all right, I'm done, see ya.
The other thing too is it keeps your reps honest, right? That they're not promising a bunch of stuff that customer success. Yeah. You do get this problem sometimes that, sales is writing all sorts of checks that customer success can't cash. But so you got to be a little bit careful of that. That's a real problem in enterprise software where we generally have some component of professional services in there. And so in enterprise software, it is very standard for professional services to be involved very early in the deal, because if they're not, then the reps tend to say, oh yeah, we can build that for $5. And then professional services comes in and says, yeah, $5 plus 5 million, we can build that, sure.
Well, what I always say is that sales should be running defense for customer success, because if you let bad customers come in, that can kill a company. And it really kind of affects the mood as well. So the art of saying no and weeding out the ones that are not part of your ICP is like, for the short-term gain, over the long run, you're going to...
The lines between customer success and sales are getting really blurry now, right?
Yeah.
Because most folks in customer success are also responsible for upselling or cross-selling and expansion into the account and all the rest of it. So it really helps to kind of think of your customer success people as being salespeople as well, right? So I have kind of two teams that are, should be in lockstep as far as this particular account is. So whatever the best way it is to do the handoff to ensure that happens, that's what I'd be trying to go for.
Yeah, for sure. I believe we covered Peter's question about positioning and the mistakes people make. Shane from Scraping Hub, figuring out segmenting when we seem to span industries and sizes of companies. We're everything to everyone. Want to make sales work better and guide our product strategy. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I work with a lot of companies that come in feeling like that. So they come to me feeling like we can't get any specificity on our positioning because we don't see the patterns in our best fit customers. They're all over the place. They cross industries, they cross sizes, we just don't get the patterns. And a lot of times that's because the patterns are weird. Like the example that I just gave you, where the pattern was, you do outsourcing, like nobody thought that's what we did. Like nobody had that insight about that was why people really chose our software. It's incredible to me that a company can be that big. They didn't really have that piece of insight. But we're used to thinking about segmentation as being firmographic. And I think that's because segmentation is a concept that came out of consumer packaged goods marketing. And consumer packaged goods marketing, you segment a market based on demographics. So it's, it's your age and your gender and where you live and how much money you make and personal characteristics. What we've tended to do in B2B, and I saw this when I take marketing classes and stuff, often the professors come from B2C and they try to take this consumer stuff and make it fit for businesses. So they'll say, oh, it's just the same thing in business, except it's firmographics instead of demographics. So it's the size of the company, it's the industry they're in, it's their geographic location. But most of the time, if what I'm trying to get to, again, is this actionable segmentation, that's not, these are not the factors that are allowing me to separate a good fit customer for a bad fit customer. And so I need to kind of figure out what those patterns are, and they're often really tricky. Like I've worked with companies so I worked with one and they were in marketing tech. And MarTech is terrible. It's really crowded. There's way too much MarTech in the world. And they had a thing that helped you create a large volume of highly personalized content for highly personalized marketing content. And so they were kind of like this content marketing tool. And so their original segmentation was you had to have more than 5 people on the marketing team, and the revenue of the company had to be X. And that the theory was if you had that, then you were probably creating a lot of material. But it turned out that's not true at all. Some of them were and some of them weren't. So if you looked at the success of outbound selling or even inbound stuff, like they had no way to predict, even if you met that criteria, whether you would be a good fit or not. So same thing, we did the same thing. We're looking at the happy customers and then trying to figure out what's the pattern. So we get them on the phone and we're like, okay, what were you doing to create this content before? And they say, oh, we just do it manually. We do this thing onesie twosie. And I say, okay, well, what happened that made you think you couldn't do that anymore and you had to do it a different way? And the customers were saying, well, actually what happened was we bought Eloqua, and it's a marketing automation platform. And then once we bought Eloqua, we set up a whole bunch of campaigns to get all these campaigns running. And then we realized, oh shit, this whole engine runs on content. And so we need a mountain of content to feed into this engine. And then we were like, we got to go get that.
Yeah.
So then the segmentation became, have you recently bought Eloqua or Marketo? Because if you have, we're a super fit. And then again, it went from us trying to sell to anybody that was, across any industry, across anything, but it wasn't industry really or size of company really that mattered. What mattered is you just bought this Eloqua thing. So if you looked at, that's an actionable customer segmentation. Now I can go build programs. What do? Well, I'm going to go sponsor the Eloqua user conference, and I'm going to have a booth at the Eloqua user conference. And these guys, you know what they did? They hired the head of sales from Eloqua's biggest implementation partner. So she just went and sold into all the accounts that she had sold in the last year. Make the number easy. So it's stuff like that. So my guess is, if you're seeing this great heterogeneity in who it is you're trying to go after, it's because you haven't quite hit on the vector that they have in common yet. So they all look different, but I guarantee you they got something in common, but it might be a combination of weird things that you just haven't thought about yet.
Smart, yeah. One other question here from Shrihans of Volograms. In one of your recent tweets, you said category creators usually lose the market they create. How can I cope with that as a category creator?
Yeah. So here's what I think, like category creation is really hot right now. It's a bit like product market fit. The VCs really like it. And some VCs that I've talked to have this weird idea that you can't actually succeed in a market unless you're creating a category. Now, much in the same way that VCs, when they talk about product market fit, they don't actually know what a market is. Often when people say they're doing category creation, I disagree with them because we disagree on the fundamental definition of what's a category. So here's an example. I worked for a company and we were selling, we thought we were selling a database, but it turned out we weren't selling a database, we were selling a data warehouse. Now, what was cool about selling a data warehouse is there were no data warehouses in the market at that time. Now that doesn't mean people didn't have a data warehouse. They did. They had just built it themselves, homegrown. Now, there's no data warehouse software in the market, and I'm the first data warehouse, more or less, to join. Am I creating a category? No. In that case, no. Because the category already existed in the minds of customers. It was just a thing that you built yourself. Mm. So when I sold a data warehouse, I didn't have to go in and explain to you what a data warehouse was. You knew what it was. I just had to explain to you why you wanted pre-built one instead of building it yourself. Now, true category creation, instead of saying, I'm building a data warehouse, I show up in your office and say, hey, you know what I sell? It's a flue flummer. And you're like, what the frick is a flue flummer? I don't know what that is. And you'll say, let me tell you. Well, we have CRM and we have email, but neither of those things solve this problem. There's actually this other problem and you don't even know it's a problem yet. It's called flue flumming. So we built a flue flummer to solve the flue flumming problem, right? And so that's what you're doing when you're category creation. And so the problem with that is there's all this education has to happen, right? And I have to make the category mean something in the minds of customers before I can sell them. And the reason the category doesn't exist is because people don't know they have the problem. If they knew they had the problem, then solutions to solve it would exist and there would be demand. If you're true category creation, no one knows they have the problem. You have to wake them up to the idea that they have the problem and create that demand. But the risk to that is that generally takes several years to actually get that idea to stick in the minds of customers. And often what happens in that several year gap is you essentially exhaust your resources as a company. So you manage, if you're lucky, you can raise some money. You get near the end of it, your investors are getting antsy because their 10-year window on their fund is coming up and they got to do something with you and they're not willing to keep investing in you. And what happens is you get to the point where you're just starting to create the market. Everybody's starting to get it in their head that that thing exists. And yes, there should be solutions. And that is the perfect time for a fast follower to come in and get you.
Yeah.
So that is MySpace, Facebook. That is every single search engine, Google. That is, that is all the MP3 players, Creative. That's what those guys are called. Remember Creative MP3 player? I had one of those. There were MP3 players on the market, and then there was the iPod, right? It's like smartphones, it's like BlackBerry, iPhone. Like the people that generally create these new categories often do not survive having a fast follower come up behind them and take the category from them after the very, very hard work of creating the category has already been done. Now, with that depressing prelogue, it is not impossible. So there's lots of examples of category creators, but they're generally big companies and they're generally like more than 100 million revenue companies.
Yeah.
And they started as niche plays. They eventually came to either be number one or number two in their category. And then what they did is essentially expand the boundaries of the category in a way that it's a new category. So this is, what are those guys called? Gainsight.
Yeah.
Insight. They're just survey software. Everybody knows what it is. They're just survey software. They were a niche thing in survey software. Then they were big survey software. Then they're number one in survey software. And then they said, you know what, man, it's not about surveys anymore. It's about engagement, or I forget what the new category was, but they had some new word for it or whatever. And that everybody went, whoa. And it worked for them because they were 200, 300 million revenue by the time they did that. But they didn't start there. Now, so there are examples of that. The other thing is, so there's two ways that you can make this work. Sometimes you can borrow an idea when you're creating a category, and it feels like you're doing pure play category creation, but you're kind of leaning into an idea from another category or an idea that exists that everyone knows. You're using that in the name of your category so that you're not a flummer, you're something with some meaning. Okay. So, and then there's legit examples of small companies that have managed to do this categorization thing. So in my book, I have an interview with this guy, Mark Organ, who was the original founder of Eloqua and created the category of marketing automation. So, but that story is very illustrative of how much, peril is in this path. So he identified these set of marketers, and this is ages ago, when people weren't doing a lot of demand generation and everybody was doing brand marketing. He found these demand generation marketers and he's like, oh, these people are weird. They have spreadsheets, they're writing code. Isn't this weird? He said, I could make software that would automate that. So he launched it as demand gen automation. Now, for the longest time, he couldn't raise any money because the VCs didn't get it because the category didn't exist. And so he was in there going, demand gen automation, demand gen automation. Now, the great thing about it, though, was that demand gen people got it because it was demand gen automation. It's automating the thing that I do already. So it was category creation, but with not a lot of education required. Now, the problem with it, though, is that market was teeny weeny. That's why the market didn't exist yet. There were just this teeny weeny slice of people needed to do it. And what he managed to do was grow up with the market. And eventually demand gen became the vast majority of what we're doing in marketing. And so we could switch the name to marketing automation and say, we're just automating all that stuff you do. And that makes sense. He had fast followers come in to challenge him, first in the form of Marketo, and then later was HubSpot. But he did have this problem with super impatient investors. And in fact, at one point, the investors fired everybody, including him, the founder. And, the company did manage to go public and get acquired and happy ever after for everybody. But the original team was no longer there when it happened.
As you say, a perilous path, but when it pays off big.
It should, right? But I'm telling you, like, I did deep research into this when I was writing the book to try to find examples of companies that set out from the beginning to be a category creator and then actually created the category and held on to it. Again, really rare.
Okay. Again, I have so many other questions, but I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much. Enlightening as usual, and a pleasure. So I would just like to say thank you and hand back over to Philip.
Awesome. April, Carl, thank you so much. I agree. We could be here for the entire Irish evening, to be honest. I guess we all agree, April, anybody in the audience who hasn't bought or listened to your book, it's on Audible since April, I think, as well, right? So
I read it too for the audio books. You get like 3 solid hours of my full Canadian accent.
There you go. So if people out there, if you don't have enough after those super great 1.5 hours with April right now.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and thanks Carl for being a good interviewer, and thanks everybody for showing up and all that.
Awesome. If you have any follow-on questions, email us at info@saasnetwork.ie. Follow April on Twitter, I guess. Carl as well. We're here to help. And if you were interested in the recording, this session was recorded, so we're more than happy to share it with everybody as well. Just reach out to us, info@saasnetwork.ie or at April Dunford. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a good night. Thanks, April. Thanks, Carl.
Okay.
Take care. Bye, folks.